Welcome to the second webinar. Our focus today is building a really strong and robust conversation about employment with the individuals you support and the people who support them, particularly their families. Like last time, we encourage you to add questions and comments down in the chat pod. It's also a place you can have dialogue with each other down in the chat pod. You'll see that get a little bigger after we fully get started. I'm going to switch screens, which is going to make the resources for download section go away, but that will come back at the end of the webinar, and you'll have a chance again to download those resources. One warning, there will be a few times during this webinar when we ask you to respond either in the questions and comments area or in a separate pod to a question. I know that some of you are participating in groups, so make sure you have someone who's assigned to the keyboard so that we can do a little back and forth when we get to those parts. And Bob, we're going to start with just a little orientation to things to come, set some context for the state of Utah, and then Janine and I will be focusing on the core content.
Can you hear me?
Yep, who's that? Bob, are you all set?
Ready to go. Can you guys can hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Just wanted to kind of give people a little bit of an idea of what we're doing here in Utah, and it's mostly in the context of the person-centered planning process that I think most of you know we've been working on. Some of this that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to be pretty brief, will probably make more sense as we get towards the end of the presentation that John and Janine are going to do. But anyway, we can answer any questions that happen with that. But I wanted to just sort of let people know that we are actively working on what we're calling an employment pathway tool. And the presentation today is going to talk about guided conversations. And so we are working on a tool, and we're building kind of a Utah-specific tool, but we're doing a lot of collecting of information from other states and from the State Employment Leadership Network that John and Janine also work with. And we're putting together this tool for guided conversations. And kind of the layout of what this tool is going to look like is really there's sort of three parts to it. The first step is a set of questions and prompts. Really on things, not that somebody has to go through or answer, but it's trying to find out where somebody is and what pathway makes the most sense for that person to be on. And then after we identify which pathway makes the most sense for the person, I'm trying to flesh out and get information. And all of this is in that context of trying to discover and get to know the person better. But once we get that pathway identified, we spend some time fleshing it out, and then we wind up with sort of a next step section. One, the person-centered support plan, and trying to put supports and services into the plan, and hopefully in many cases, if not all cases, some goals towards employment for most of our folks. And then we also try to do some work on helping people understand what types of things would be relevant and important for voc rehab for each one of the pathways and where people would go. In terms of what our pathways are, we've identified 4 of them. The individual is unemployed but expresses an interest in work. The individual is unemployed but doesn't really want to work right now. So then how to kind of deal with that. The third one being the individual is currently working but desires a change. So somebody, a lot of people you can imagine would like to do more with their job or have a different job or something like that. That are working and are currently satisfied with their job. One thing I wanted to mention is that, and in each one of those pathways, we give some special attention to transition, or that age from 16 to 22, which is sort of that normal time when people start thinking about a job and a career. So those are kind of the way that the tool is laid out for us. This sort of next slide, it's kind of, it's just really a graphic or a visual of going over those same things. But first part of the process is to identify the correct pathway. The second part is to explore the pathway and further understand where that person is at. And then finally, integrate that employment pathway into, or that employment into the person-centered planning, which might include VR and transition activities, etc. So in a nutshell, that's sort of what we're doing, but just a couple other things to let people know. A couple of things are that we will, and we're actively working on integrating this into USteps, and so this is going to be a tool that's going to be right there to use, electronically. It is going to sort of help us also with the settings rule compliance, and that's that concept of that everybody really should have an opportunity to seek employment and work in competitive and integrated settings. And that's something that we're required to do. I think it's a great idea anyway. So that's really where we're at. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention was, if people are interested in testing the tool, we're pretty far along with it. And if anybody is interested, to either contact myself or Amy. If you get those email addresses, most of you know those email addresses one way or another. But anyway, just reach out to us, because we will, in probably the next month or so, be asking people to try to do some pilot testing and let us know how it goes. And we'll sort of see who's interested and then build a group to do that and collect information. So that's really kind of all I had for where we are in Utah. So I'm going to pass it back to John and Janine.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks. Janine, are you set?
You all hear me now? John?
You sound good. You might have a little echo, so you might want to be careful you turn off your computer, turn down your computer audio.
I can only use my computer audio, John. Sorry, the phone line wasn't working.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and to this second webinar, information sharing. This webinar, we finished the importance of employment during our first recorded webinar, and this one we are going to talk about the employment conversation. Before we begin, I would just like to go over what John and I are expecting, for you to have the following objectives for this webinar. So we want to make sure that you understand the use of guided conversations to identify an individual's pathway to employment, ensure the decision to work is based upon making an informed choice, and then also work through a little bit with you on addressing common employment barriers and concerns so that you can support employment next steps. Employment really is the brass ring for all of us. Like all of us, people with IDD want an opportunity to participate in paid employment and earn a living wage. Much like the rest of us, it is a norm for working age adults in our country. They want to be recognized as contributing members of their community, but someone, and most of the time it's you all as support coordinators, has to start engaging and exploring the possibilities with the person about employment through conversation. As a case manager, your role is to really help people you support to discover the benefits of employment and also help them along the way to develop a path to work. It's really critical to ask questions and to facilitate discussions that really get at the heart of a person's skills and interests. And we're going to talk today about a couple of tools that may help. I wanted to bring up the Employment First for DSPD because it is a priority in the state of Utah. The DSPD Employment First Strategic Plan states that Utah passed Employment First legislation back in 2011, placing emphasis on employment opportunities for all. Expecting, encouraging, providing, the words like creating, and rewarding community integrated employment in the workforce is really supported by your Employment First policy. Employment is to be competitive and integrated at competitive wages and benefits as the first and preferred outcome. The Employment First vision also is that every person who receives services from DSPD achieves their career possibilities. So you have a structure and an expectation already in place for the Employment First movement. Oops, my apologies. I'd really like to focus and anchor this discussion on two really important concepts when you talk about having these conversations and how you have these conversations. That is informed choice and supported decision making, because they are two foundational concepts that are important to our discussion today. Informed choice starts definitely with the assumption that all people have the right to make choices and decisions about their lives. Making an informed choice is critical for definitely our independence and also the happiness of us all. I know that you can think of several occasions, just like myself, on when you might have had to ask someone because you needed assistance in making an informed choice. And you may have called upon trusted family and friends to assist you in making that decision. Supported decision-making is an effort to promote the rights of people with disabilities to make their own informed decisions by developing their skills and identifying the support they need to make maybe some of their decisions, maybe a certain area of decision-making like medical, for instance. Maybe they might need a lot of support, a little support. The fact is, it's very individualized. Supported decision-making is a tool that can help you talk with the person to really iron out where they might need support for certain decisions or only when they ask. People with disabilities can use supported decision-making to gain support in making their own choices, and this really supports self-direction and leading a self-determined life and an independent life. To really implement and support informed choice and supported decision-making, it really involves working with the person to identify, as I said, where help is needed, for what decisions, and then devising an approach together for providing it. The person that is making that informed choice is always in that driver's seat during the decision and really should have the authority, the decision-making authority, to make a voluntary, well-considered decision that is based on their options and experiences, information, and a thorough understanding. People really should be free to make a decision about whether or not they also wish to accept the options and considerations that we may put forth as supporters. For example, if you had asked me if I would like to go to lunch and do I want to have Kentucky Fried Chicken, for instance, or Popeye's Chicken, those of you who are familiar with those two fast food places. Is that really a viable option if, number one, I really don't particularly care for chicken, and number two, is that really a viable choice? Because they're two of the same restaurants. If you would have said maybe McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken, I might have been able to make a better choice based on my preferences, and they're viable and very different choices. So that's a really simple example versus if I had a certain medical condition and the physician said, here are your two options to make you have a better quality of life according to this medical condition, and which of these will you choose? In that instance, those choices may be limited because of your situation, your medical condition. So I just wanted to differentiate between those two examples. Making an informed choice also entails working with the person, as I said, to identify where help is needed. And devising that approach, really, you can look at it from a couple different ways. Someone may need one-on-one support and discussion. Somebody may want that from you in private. It can also involve a team approach. They might say, I would like, a couple of these people at the table to discuss my options. And other times, you may have to explain things pictorially to someone. The way we communicate cannot be identified just with our communication by speaking. There are so many different modes, especially with the explosion of technology and technology support, that everyone can have a self-determined life, make informed choices, and get the support that they need. Using that supported decision-making approach means that, people's rights are always presumed. This is a founding principle in our society, and it's a basic human right and a freedom. People will have full control of decisions impacting their lives. Who among us doesn't want to feel empowered, independent, and in control? Decisions are supported by services only if needed, and also a wide range of natural support networks that we have built in our communities. These types of decisions are not made solely from the lens of a person's disability, and that's the point that I really want to drive home. Assistance with decision-making is available when needed, and as I said before, it is individualized with no assumptions on our part on what we think should be, and in what ways somebody needs to be supported. Balance the need for support with the autonomy and self-determination of the person. And I know, I have been a support coordinator myself, so I surely know that this is a delicate balance between those two factors. But the important thing to remember is that it's always a delicate balance, but that one is not weighted more heavily than the other when you're talking about people's lives. Studies, you might say that, John and I talking about this is enough, but, and you probably have the same beliefs, but if you want to really look into some studies around informed choice and supported decision-making and its correlation to leading a self-determined life, you can Google it and you can find them anywhere. At the bottom of the slide, there is a study reference there where I used to get the information for this slide. And it doesn't matter what study that you look at, all of these studies find that a person's self-determination status, when they are in control of their lives, it really predicts the higher quality of life and positively correlates to better outcomes. Some of the areas that it can contribute to better outcomes is in a person's health. They are more independent, they feel more well-adjusted, and they're, interestingly enough, better able to recognize and resist abuse. We're going to switch to a video from Jonathan Martinez. This video was done for the Minnesota Department of Human Services, the Disability Services Division, and they have given us their okay to share it with you. So I think if I'm right, John, you have to listen to this video. Is it through your computer speakers?
Everybody on should be fine. If you happen to be on listening on the phone, you'll miss the audio, but I don't think there's anybody in that situation. So here we go.
Hello and welcome to our introduction and guide to supported decision making. My name is Jonathan Martinez. I am the Senior Director for Law and Policy at the Burton Blatt Institute of Syracuse University. In this session, we're going to talk about self-determination, what it is, and why it's important. And as we begin, I have a question for you. What's your favorite right? I know, it's a funny question. It kind of sounds like a pickup line at an ACLU convention, but think about it. What is the right that makes you feel the best and strongest about being an American, a human, a citizen? Is it freedom of speech? The right to vote, the right to free association, community integration, employment? Now ask yourself, what do all of these rights have in common? It's choice, isn't it? Freedom of speech is the right to choose what to say. The right to vote is the right to choose who to vote for. Freedom of association, the right to choose who to be with. Every single right we have comes down to choice. Choice is what makes our rights worthwhile. On your screen is a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, who I'll admit to you is not the happiest writer on the planet, but he gets it absolutely right. He says, I am my choices. I cannot not choose. And think about it. Every person listening to this video, every person in front of their computer right now is where they are because of the choices they made. The good choices, the bad choices, the silly choices, the significant choices. Choice is what makes us who we are. It tells us who we want to be and who we don't want to be. Well, clinically, that right to make choices is known as self-determination. It's a fancy term. It just means control over life. A person with self-determination is the captain of his or her ship. They do things rather than having things done to them. They are actors rather than having things acted upon them. And we've known for 40 years in study after study after study that people with disabilities who have more self-determination have better lives. This is not Jonathan talking. This is people with way more initials after their name than me. And they have found time after time that when people with disabilities have more control over their life, when they make more choices, they're healthier, they're more independent, more likely to be employed, better able to adjust to changing needs, and safer. Now, with that, I have another question for you. Those rights that are so important to you, that make you who you are, they're worth anything if you're not allowed to exercise them? In our next session, we'll talk about what happens when people have their right to make choices taken away through a legal process. Legal process called guardianship. But for now, I want to say thank you for joining us on this first part, and I look forward to talking to you next time.
I think you all could hear from that. Oh, sorry. Okay. I think you could all hear from that video. Jonathan is someone that I really admire his work on this subject. And we could put the link to the website where Jonathan does a lot of his work from, as well as there are tons of resources that you might find really, really helpful to you. And I really want to say so sorry, too, about some of the audio during that part of the presentation. So please bear with us, and we appreciate it so much. So I'm going to conclude my portion right now with boiling down some salient points that I think are really, really important to walk away with when you think about supported decision making and informed choice being a part of that journey. Everyone has the right to make informed choices about employment and every other aspect of their life. People can get help making informed choices about employment or any other thing that they want without giving up, any other right. And I really stress that because this is individualized, as I said before. There's no one-size-fits approach to any of this. And people will often need help in understanding, making, and communicating their choices. And that's why supported decision-making has a support and that support lined out in an agreement is really, really important to consider. The last thing I wanted to say is that, no one's path for making an informed choice will be the same. Some may find it, some of these decisions to be very, very smooth and easy. Some may feel that they're going up a hill to finally come to a decision about a particular thing. And for others, there may be different decision points that we feel like we are on a terribly rocky path. But any of those times, our role is to really seek to maximize the independence of the people we support, empower them any way we can to help them to make choices, to support their self-determination and independence, and to really support the full protection of their rights. In order for us to do this and accomplish these points, we have to make a focused effort to help the person always be at the center of our discussion. And I think I am turning it over to you, John.
So that brings us to talking about what it means to have an effective conversation and how we adjust that conversation depending on the pathway that a person is on. Thinking back, reflecting back to some of what Bob said at the beginning in terms of thinking about where people are and how that affects the kind of conversation we need to have with them. I'm going to just take a minute to reflect back on a couple of things we touched on in the first webinar. First, we know people want to work. Overwhelmingly, a very high percentage of people who aren't working tell us that they want to work in an integrated community job. We have a strong belief and clear evidence from individual experiences around the country that people can work, including people with significant disabilities. Doesn't mean we're always good at it, but that it's possible. We looked at this chart when we met last time, and it gives a simple illustration of the want to work point. So in the middle chart of the roughly 80% of people who are not currently working, almost half say they want a job. Nationally, that means something like 241,000 people tell us that they'd like an opportunity to work in a community job. Our challenge is in that final pie chart. Our challenge is that only about 43% of those 241,000 people tell us that they have a goal in their service plan. We need to have an impact on that number. We need to capture the interest, and then we need to translate that to an action step. So having conversations helps us find out who a person is. It helps us understand their interests and more importantly, address their concerns. And Janina is going to spend some time talking about how to start those conversations and frame them. We're going to circle back towards the end about, so what if someone has a concern? How do we have that conversation? And how do we think more broadly?
Your microphone has been turned on.
How do we think more about a range of options for addressing that? Thinking about how to give people experiences that support that conversation is a critical part of that. That'll be a piece that Janine addresses. And finally, understanding the person well enough to be able to provide effective supports. Janine, back to you.
Okay. Just move this slide. So John set the stage with excellent data to help us think about where we can have an impact. And where we can have an impact is where we plan with the person and really have these conversations, because having any type of guided conversation with regards to employment really helps people process that information, as I said, to really make that informed choice. They can draw their own conclusions then and make their own decisions. We're going to talk a little bit about guidance for conversation starters, and many states have developed their own guidance for conversations documents, but John and I wanted to share one developed by the State Employment Leadership Network, the SELN, of which Utah is a member. The SELN guidance for conversations document was truly developed because of the identification of a need for support coordinators to have tools to hold employment conversations and work through barriers. Having those conversations is very critical to assisting people with disabilities and their families to discover what possibilities and what support options exist if they need them as they identify down their path to employment. The ultimate goal of any guidance for conversation document, and Utah is doing a great job in the development of your own. The ultimate goal, though, is to identify and design a person's pathway towards rewarding employment. And these tools, as we go through this tool, really helps to anchor the discussion and get a starting point. So, in our conversation, in the SELN conversation starters, there are a couple of different areas that I want to highlight. The first one talks about, and we address this today, and you know it because you're living it, and you know in the person-centered planning HCBS regulations, in person-centered planning, one of the tenets is to make sure that you're having conversations about employment and participating in community life. So the first piece of a guidance doc really sets the understanding of the fundamentals of employment success. The second is the conversations. The person may express concerns, and it's your job and all of our job to really try to address them and shift that focus so that they can see the possibilities about employment. People are, when I talked about those paths to employment, you have to meet people where they are. You really need to identify the individual's core interests when you're thinking about developing a person-centered plan. And then we also might have someone that we're supporting, and very likely, that is already experiencing employment success. But they may want to move up, make more money. I mean, just having a job isn't, it is the brass ring, but as we all know, as we learn and grow in our job, we identify the need to either move on, want to move up in our own, position. So having that conversation is really, really critical to this piece too. It doesn't end when the person gets a job. It's very fluid. So how do you start having these conversations? What do you see as, good questions to ask? Well, let's go through that a little bit. Have you ever been asked a closed-ended question where you just have yes or no? Well, that doesn't give you or the person that's asking you the question really that much information on the why behind your answer. So you have to be really careful about the questions you ask. Some of those closed-ended questions might be, hi, do you want to work? Do you like it here? Do you like the support you're receiving here? And as I said, these really don't expand the conversation. Asking open-ended questions, rather, really help to elicit you receiving a more complex answer so that you discover a person's knowledge, opinions, and feelings about a particular subject. These questions usually begin with what, why, or how. And as you can see on the slide, well, why do you think that is a great question to ask. Tell me about this. Describe it. Any of those can really work well when you're trying to open up conversations and get answers that can give you more solid information. We have to seek to understand, not just to be, understood, because when we dig deeper and we ask, why do you think that? It really helps to open the doors to discussions that get at a person's varied interests, concerns, and belief systems. And this could be theirs, the support of their family, and other supporters that are involved. You want to get the big picture. Give time to think through this stuff. As I said, I was a support coordinator, and this sometimes wasn't an easy subject for many, many reasons. It could be a benefits question, it could be some fear, but be comfortable with the silence. If you do ask these questions, give people time to really think about it and answer. It may take them a little bit of time to get comfortable, or it may take them a little bit of time to want to share. Start with understanding what a person likes and dislikes, and really you can build from there and build this conversation. While the SELN guide and other states' guides and Utah's guide is a terrific tool to start and keep the conversations moving, you may have other tools that you have used to help support this work as well. That may help you, help deepen your understanding of the person as a whole. And definitely the person-centered planning process is one. This is an example of one of the conversation starters from the SELN document. So you may find that the person that you are supporting expresses concerns about their work or a work goal. So meeting this person where they are entails knowing that they have expressed concerns about having that work goal. So what kinds of questions can you ask to start to shift the focus towards employment? We put some examples up there. Tell me about past work that you have done. That person may have had a terrible experience at a job that was a bad job match that has really affected their willingness to move forward with employment. What worries you about getting a job? And what's the best thing that can happen if you get a job? So those are some sample questions, but we want to take this time to ask you if you would write into the questions and comment sections below some action steps that would help a person if they said that they had concerns about employment. So if someone said the past work they have done is in a supermarket bagging groceries and they hated it, or I have back issues and my back hurt all the time bending and carrying the bags into the cart, what kinds of action steps would you do to help to move that person into a new job? If you wouldn't mind typing some some comments on action steps below. Thank you, Debbie. I'm just waiting a couple seconds. I see there's some folks typing. Thanks so much for your participation. So Robert says, finding experiences that let them better understand their interests. So that's an excellent answer. I don't know if this person, had an interest at some point, and that's why they made the job match, but you're right. If it's not a good job match, really finding other experiences that will help you understand what interests and where a person would like to move from that job to would be extremely helpful. And you would really want to have a solid relationship with that job developer to give them some of this feedback as well. Debbie said, this is a great question too, Debbie. What did you like about that job? Because just because the person said that, my back was bothering me or I didn't like it, there might have been some things during that daily work experience that the person really did like. So it might just be taking the things that they found that they liked and moving on to a different job. Shelby says, keep encouraging, reevaluating interests, do more job sampling. Another excellent suggestion, just one job working in a grocery store. I mean, can you all think about your first job or jobs that you had? I'm still some of them, I know mine. Burns in the back of my mind till this day. And they really help us to get to understand where we don't want to move to and in what direction and what we do. Focusing on people's strengths, super important. I mean, as part of these conversation starters, you saw that we really want to move on to people, looking at people's strengths to be the first and foremost or most part of planning. And then Bobby, maybe employer could provide some type of accommodation. Excellent, Bobby. If their back is bothering them from doing one piece of the job, there might be another one. So we're going to move on to see some of the action steps that we've identified. And you guys identified them too. Identify concerns and solutions to them. We heard a couple people say explore interests, maybe have the person do some volunteer work, take some classes, watch on what types of experiences they're telling you they really, really enjoy, and keep building those community networks and experiences, because as most of us can attest, we all might have gotten one job or another from someone we know in our community. I think this is you, John, right?
I think that is me. So conversation starter tools can be used at any point. They're not particularly sequential. There are a variety of tools that you can take with you as handouts and prompts for yourself as you're in a conversation with an individual and their family in the guide that you can download at the end of the webinar if you haven't downloaded it already. But I'd like to take a second and think about the concern side of the work we do. There are people who want to work, and it's just a question of making it happen. There are people who have specific concerns themselves or whose family have specific concerns that we need to figure out how to address as part of that conversation. So if you could just take a minute, you can check more than one if you like, but what are the top 2, 3 concerns that you're hearing as you work with job seekers? What gets you stuck is another way to think about this. Transportation is coming up big, and it is a concern. We tend to get very stuck on kind of our traditional systems-oriented solutions to transportation. Getting more creative about transportation options is a central part of really expanding access to employment. People who have challenges, behaviors that might be is either a concern to the people who support them or a concern to the workplace can be an issue, and figuring out how to, well, maybe cycle back to talking a little bit about how to best address that, or if people have thoughts on that, feel free to add some comments to the chat pod down on the left. I think about some of my own early experiences helping people to find jobs, and one person who was always stuck out in my head is a woman who had a really difficult time in our sheltered workshop. She would throw furniture, threw things down the stairwells, and Michelle didn't really come into her own until we got her into a work situation that really fit who she was. And the workshop was not that. She was frustrated almost every day when she was with us. And part of what was really striking about her was in a workplace where she was comfortable and happy, I could visibly see her stop herself from particularly doing some things that could be self-injurious. In her case, was a piece of who she was. But she wanted to be there, and finding a match or a place that can accommodate who that person is a key part of what we need to think about. A couple of other comments at the bottom. Yes, certainly educating the community is part of our task. A lot of that is by creating good examples. Lack of work opportunities. I don't personally find that willing employers is the issue, but we have to get better at how we approach employers, and we'll maybe come back to that a little bit in one of the later webinars. Rural areas have both strengths and challenges. The challenges, there may not be as wide an array of businesses. The strength is that people know each other, and we know that networking is the easiest, best pathway to employment opportunities for people, and can create more opportunities for job creation, job negotiation, customizing a job to who an individual is. So some of the common concerns, we've touched on a lot of these: safety at work, fear of losing benefits. So making sure people have a way to connect to those kinds of things. Our challenge is to think outside the box. And I'm going to show a short video clip that illustrates one person whose family had some concerns about her work situation, but she also worked in a situation that had legitimate issues in terms of safety kinds of issues, but they overcame them. So we'll take a little minute to hear from Jessica and her family and take a look at her work situation.
Why you think your son or daughter with a disability can't work or shouldn't work. You are not alone. Many parents have the same concerns, but by being open to the possibilities and with the right support, they overcame those fears, and as a result, felt the benefits of work outweighed the challenges.
We are Lawrence and Benita Markle, Jessica Markle's parents. Jessica is 31 years old. She's mentally challenged. She's totally blind. She has some communication and speech and language problems. She's very capable of doing everyday things. She is independent in many ways as far as taking care of herself. However, she does live with us, and she does require around-the-clock supervision because she also has seizures.
She's always been aggressive with what she wants to do, not afraid to try something. She's always been a happy child. She has a lot of smile.
She graduated from the Maryland School of the Blind in June and started with ARC like July the 1st, right after graduation.
We are an organization that provides various types of supports to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Harford and Cecil counties. I wear a lot of different hats at the ARC. I am a job developer. I also supervise transition services for students exiting school at 21. I work with the Division of Rehabilitation Services to provide job development for folks who don't qualify for long-term supports. And in my spare time, I run the Summer Jobs Program. Jess came to us as a transitioning youth from the Maryland School for the Blind. And when Jess was transitioning, I completed an assessment of her skills and learned very quickly that she was very tactile, wonderful sense of touch, very good fine motor skills. At the time, we had a contract in-house to make the headrest pins that go in cars. And it required putting a piece of tape around the pin in an exact, it had to be straight, and then putting it in a punch that cut the tape. And Jess did it better than everybody else we had who could see what they were doing.
If you can get somebody to put this weather stripping in, which is the job that Jessica does, we could fly.
And that was how she came to be at Acadia, because they fell in love with her as everybody does.
We had a lot of concerns. We had a lot of fears.
At first, that was kind of scary to me.
Not only for her safety, but, you know, not for her physical safety, but personal safety, because she can't protect herself from anything bad that's happening to her. So we were concerned about those issues. What happens when she crosses this area where she's going to travel from the lunchroom to the workspace, and you got forklifts and trucks going through here, and how's that going to be managed? Suppose she's in a distressed situation, how's that going to be handled? So they addressed all those needs. The first thing is they put a little monitor on her belt. All she has to do is touch a button and an alarm goes off, and everybody in the plant knows that she has an issue. All the employees have really, they really have come to and jumped up to the task. I mean, they are so involved with her welfare, and they want to protect her any way they can. We had put in all these safety things into the work area as much as we could, so if she would fall, there would be protection. I was concerned. At the beginning, I was worried, but eventually it went away.
In the time that she's been here, she certainly learned her job. She does her job very well.
I really haven't had any fears until recently when she did have a seizure at work. I was really afraid that they would say she can't come back to work anymore, but they rolled with it, sent her to the emergency room, and we dealt with it, and we've made some changes in medication, and she's been fine.
We were surprised. Her parents knew that, but the epilepsy had been dormant for so long that it was not really an issue and hadn't come up. She had a seizure at the ARC, then she had a seizure here. So what became the challenge for us, because now we're enthused. We want to keep Jessica working. We want to keep her employed. So the challenge become, all right, how are we going to deal with the potential for a seizure? So we talked to the people at the ARC who have experts in that. In the beginning, we had her in a bump cap, like a little industrial hard hat. If you see her now, you see she's wearing a bicycle helmet. That came from the fact that the ARC is used to dealing with people with seizure disorders, and it was an appropriate piece of head. It was reorient her workplace. We turned her around 180 degrees, so now if she falls, she'll fall on the floor and rather than the machinery that was alongside of her before, and she will also fall on padding. We were able to pad the area. She
had some health issues not too long ago, and her mother called and said, Jess just came downstairs and said, it's just not right that I'm home. Today's a work day. I should be.
I'm going to stop us there, and I'm going to encourage people to kind of follow the link to that video to watch the rest of Jessica's story. It's a wonderful example of both paying attention to and listening to what someone's good at, listening to concerns and doing problem solving and brainstorming to put pieces in place both from a family perspective and from a business perspective to make it work. And I think it also illustrates the principle of dignity of risk pretty well. Jessica is someone who is blind and also has some other disability issues, but she's able to do the job well and meet a very specific need for that business, and is a valued part of that business situation. That's good job creation and building an effective conversation both with the family, but in this case also with the employer to do some problem solving. We're going to take a little bit to think about and practice the idea of problem solving. I've always been intrigued by creative brainstorming and how we help ourselves think outside the box. Grace Hopper said the most dangerous phrase in our language is "we've always done it this way." So I'm going to ask you guys to think broadly for a minute. I'm going to take us a little outside of our world and give you a couple of things to think about. This is a place where you might want to have someone ready to type. And I would also say we're going to start with this. What's this? And what I'm looking for is interesting answers to that question and the most answers possible to that question. So if you guys could take a minute, I'm going to give you like 60 seconds of silence to brainstorm among yourselves, or if you're on your own attending, take some time to just write it down on a list or type it in the chat pod. What is this? Love the answers. And there's some answers I have never seen before, which is great. I use this a lot over the years. A smiling face in a pool of water is a wonderful answer. That's one I've never heard. A blue circle is kind of the obvious, clear answer. Eyeball's a great one. A rose, cool. Bouncy ball. Water in the well, I like. Blue scribble, that's correct. You got here in a bathtub drain, perfect. You guys are good at this, and it means you're probably good at what you do. This particular exercise comes from a guy named Roger Van Oak, who wrote a book called A Whack on the Side of the Head. It's an older book, but I recommend it as a way to think differently about how we brainstorm. We tend to brainstorm, we tend to edit ourselves as we brainstorm, even when we're all sitting around in the meeting trying to solve a problem. People say something, and this probably will ring true to you, and somebody criticizes it, and it shuts down the conversation. Roger Van Oak did this particular exercise with two age groups, a bunch of second graders and a bunch of sixth graders. The second graders did what many of you did. They started to generate ideas and fill the blackboard with possibilities. The sixth graders looked at him like he had a hole in his head and said, "It's a blue dot." We need to carve out the ability to brainstorm more freely as we try to solve problems, because there are solutions that fall outside of our everyday practice and our professional roles. Or to put it another way, Roger Van Oak would say there is no right answer. The amount a person uses his imagination is inversely proportional to the amount of punishment he receives for using it. So here's the second question. How are a cat and a refrigerator the same? 60 seconds again to generate some ideas. Both purr, great answer. They both give me a cold shoulder. I love that answer. They both make noise, sometimes a lot. They both give us comfort. That's a great answer, Bonnie. our challenge is to brainstorm with this kind of comfort and to get ideas on the table before we start criticizing the ideas. We're going to practice this in a second on something that's more real. So here's some, they both have places to put fish. They both have tails. They both have 4 paws. You guys had some great answers. Purring is a great answer. Cold shoulder is a great answer. That was a really good list, generated quickly. These are fun things to do to try to shake us up a little bit before we go into our serious brainstorming. Kind of the principle that illustrates is this one from Roger Van Oaks. Look for the second right answer, he would say. Or Emile Chartier said, nothing is more dangerous than an idea when it's the only one that you have. So we're going to do a little quick brainstorming that is more real. And these are the rules. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write down as many possibilities as possible to a more real life situation. The most answers wins. So whether that's you individually or a group, you can use your group. Make as long a list as you can. And the second brainstorming rule is that the craziest idea wins. So we're looking for stuff that's way outside of the box. Stranger the better. There are no other rules, and this is the situation. Transportation was one of the big challenges people identified. So Rachel's job is about 5 miles away from her home. There is public transportation, but the bus route does not run by her home, and she and her family aren't comfortable with her bus skills. How many ways can you think of that she might get to work? And I'm going to give you just a little time to think about that. So we've got some stuff coming in. You guys may be making your own lists, which is good too. I'm going to ask how many ideas you got down on the piece of paper by the time the 2 minutes is up. I'll just read off some of these as we go. Requesting special transportation, looking for coworkers who live close by, or a neighbor who can help her get to the bus or to a source of transportation. Family drives her. Can she ride a bike if it's close enough? Is there someone who could ride public transit with her while she's thinking? How about crazy ideas? Anybody have something that's more off the wall than any of those things? Electric scooter? Learning to drive, we don't always think about that. Uber, I don't know about Utah. There are places that down where we have someone drive a 4-wheeler. That's great. Uber is a reimbursable transportation resource in some places. I'm still looking for that crazy off-the-wall idea. Church member for ride, good answer. Get a horse, love that. That's a good one. Appropriate for parts of Utah, I suspect. Hot air balloon. Now we're talking, just beam her up. Kind of a simple idea, while I summarize a little bit, if people type in, if you were making a list, type in how many responses, how many ideas you had on your list so we can get a sense of what our maximum is. But what's interesting as we've done this process is we started with fairly straightforward answers. As people loosened up and we got answers like get a horse or a hot air balloon, it loosens up the conversation. Hitchhike, love that. It loosens up the conversation. It makes us think differently, and we're not in a situation where anybody is criticizing it. Again, think about brainstorming you've been in where somebody suggests an idea and the immediate response is, that'll never work, or we tried that. Those are responses that shut it down quickly. Good brainstorming if you're really practicing good brainstorming in a systematic way, you break into completely separate steps, generating ideas, making a list, which is what I asked you guys to do just now, and then assessing and evaluating the list. It keeps the ideas flowing and forces us to wait. Golf cart, we got one person who had 7 ideas. We only brainstormed for about 60 seconds to a couple of minutes. So think about how you use your brainstorming time. Transportation, many of these things were touched on, but vouchers, things like Uber and Lyft. I love the answers like the 4-wheeler. Co-workers, family and friends. I worked with someone whose brother was very much part of the job search process and brainstorming contacts, and ended out being a ride for one of the directions to work. Elder services, horse. We do need to think more about job matching, and one of the mistakes we make in job development is not thinking about transportation ahead of time and then building our job search around the parameters of what's possible. So that's distance and resources that are available and those kinds of things. Hiring a driver could work. Contracting individually with a cab company for a daily ride in one of the directions. Putting together multiple parts of these kinds of things. If we use the kind of conversational approach that Janine set up for people who have concerns about work or who have identified concerns about work, this kind of brainstorming and open conversation can open up a range of options that may take us beyond the typical. Remember, as brainstormers, start by understanding the issue, ask open-ended questions to understand, and then focus on getting ideas on the table with an emphasis on quantity. Don't worry about quality. And then at the very end, talk about what might and might not work. Janine, back to you to wrap us up.
All right. I love those exercises, and as John said, it truly shows just how creative all of you are in a very limited amount of time to come up with some solutions. This graphic is another way that you can think through a solution, but to think through a solution when you're dealing with a variety of different perspectives, which I know you do every day. So this is just a graphic that you could use when you're working together as a team, because it's casting a wider lens on what's working and not working, and you can look for some of the commonalities. For almost every problem, we can come up with at least one solution, I think. We just sometimes have to be creative, as you all just were, as I said, or roll up our sleeves and take more time to really be with people. Most people face barriers to making a change in their lives at some point or another, but with persistence, good planning, and definitely appropriate supports and services, many of these barriers can be overcome. Multiple solutions that you might develop by yourself or with a team and the person, they really can be implemented with persistence, good planning, and sometimes the use of services and supports to help you overcome some of those barriers. The important part of our webinar today and talking about informed choice, thinking through solutions, is that maintaining clear communication about your role and everybody's role, and really trying to find a solution by documenting or at least bringing that relevance to the conversation of what did and did not work, and using each of these experiences that a person has to develop yet a new action plan, a fluid action plan. It really helps people, the team, the person stay on board and on track. The first job that a person has, as we all said, might not work out for a myriad of reasons, but the second one, third one, or another one might be that person's sweet spot and might be where they want to stay and start their career. Don't ever lose faith. You have, in my opinion, one of the most rewarding and hardest jobs in our field, but so very important to the support of making people's dreams and helping them get on a footing for employment. You definitely are the first support to them. And then lastly, I just want to say that it's important to recognize that there's always going to be trial and error. Don't see that as a failure. I know that's hard sometimes because we all take all of this very personally, but having trial and error for all of us is a good thing. It really helps to shape, again, what's going to work best for us and what's not. So we're going to leave you with a few key takeaways from today. Every day, we all make choices, which may be well-informed. We might have to make some of them on a whim because we have to make that decision pretty quickly. Or we may receive some faulty information or information that we might have moved in one direction but found out later that, oh, if we would have known more, that may not be the path that we would have took. Informed choice means making decisions based on all of those things in all of those different ways after careful consideration of the options, as careful as you can be, because I said some are on a whim. We want to make sure people have reliable and accessible information, accessible to their needs, and real life experiences. You all have a valued role in promoting informed choice and helping to provide that information about the benefits of definitely working in the community. For the decision-making process to result in a process that is free from any coercion and that the person is and can make an informed choice, some of these takeaways to keep in mind are really take the time to learn more about the person. And I know you all do that through the person-centered planning process. But as I said, that's one snapshot in time, and people change. Address the person or their family's fears and challenges. Acknowledge them. That's really important to meet them all where they are. Provide clear information about employment and the benefits of a job and what those benefits could be on a person's life. Help the person move beyond doubt and be willing to take some risk based on their comfort level. And lastly, be patient but persistent. Keep having these conversations. Someone might not want to move down a path today, but may change their mind tomorrow. And always remain optimistic about the process. Thank you all very much. And at this time, I think John and I are more than willing to take on any questions that you have from today. Just type them in the chat pod if you have any. And if you're thinking, you will see that there are some polls that we would love you to participate in. It really helps us shape the next webinars, and we really want to learn and hear about your experiences today. John, I'm not seeing any questions. Do you have any other closing remarks?
No other closing remarks. If you didn't have a chance to grab the downloads, go ahead and do that. I hope everybody's seeing the whole of each of these polls because they're looking a little weird on my screen. But We'll keep this up for a little bit and so that you have a chance to download. But in the meantime, we thank you and we look forward to seeing you again in another month.
Yes, thank you so much for your participation today. Have a good afternoon.